This is the way it feels to move through summer in Lululemon. Iconic Align softness without the front seam. For our smoothest look and feel ever, summer won't know what hit it. Stretch your limits in the non-stop flexibility of the new Lululemon Align No-Line Pant in select stores and at Lululemon.com.
Your payments are showing. But with Apple Cash, your payments are private by design. There are no public feeds. Send and receive money privately in messages or with Tap to Cash. Switch to Apple Cash. Apple Cash services are provided by Green Dot Bank, member FDIC.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 545, The Battle of Prokhorovka, Part 2. Last time, on July 12th, the three SS divisions were attacking towards the city. To take it would be to provide a shield against a Soviet counterattack, trying to stop the German occupation of Obayan further west, whose forces would then make for Kursk. And there had been progress, painful progress, for the SS divisions, but the last Soviet line of defense before the city had been reached. Yet, it was the Soviets who launched an attack that July 12th. Now, it was the Germans who had to figure out the best way to respond. The best-case scenario for the Germans would be for the SS divisions to completely wipe out the Soviet forces around Prokhorovka. If accomplished, they could then drive north to Kursk, regardless of what happened at Obayan. But as that morning of July 12th opened up, the best-case scenario for Corps Commander Paul Hauser of the SS Panzer seemed to be dwindling down to just holding on to what they had. Back to the fighting, as we saw last time. During the morning of July 12th, the Soviets brought the fight to the invaders, and in these early morning exchanges, the Soviets lost a few dozen tanks. The Germans, parts of the 1st SS Panzer Artillery Regiment. These exchanges were in the German center, held by the Leibstandarte, and on its left, helping to keep that flank secure, was the rest of the Reconnaissance Battalion and Panzer Commander Ace Michael Wittmann's group of 4 Tiger tanks. Earlier that morning, when other Soviet tanks had forced Ribbentrop, the son of Foreign Minister Ribbentrop and company, to recross the anti-tank ditch to save themselves, the Soviet 181st Tank Brigade hit the Leibstandarte's left flank. This battle, like that of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, lasted 3 hours. The battle started off with the tanks firing at each other from 1,000 meters away, to then point blank as they kept approaching each other. Eventually, the Soviet tanks were driven away. None of the Tigers were lost. Still, the Soviets would be back. Indeed, there was fighting ranging all around to the west of Prokhorovka. But backing up a bit, at 6 a.m. that morning, July 12th, Commander of the 5th Guards Tank Army, General Pavel Romitstrov, with his staff, had settled in at the command post of 29th Tank Corps on a hill just southwest of the city. This gave him an excellent view of the battlefield, but what made it better in a gruesome kind of way was the severed tree line below him. But then the stillness was ruined by bouts of heavy rain starting at 6 a.m., and then Luftwaffe raids starting 30 minutes later. The bombs of the Stukas set fire to the wheat fields below Romitstrov, but soon Yak-9s and La-5s came to engage the German aircraft. And eventually, with the German fighters and bombers gone, now came the roar of the Soviet bombers and their escorts. They were heading for the suspected areas of Panzer concentration, but even with the treetops missing, it was hard to tell. This was followed by the artillery barrage of the Soviets and then their surge of tanks from the 29th and 18th Corps. Coming out to meet them were the panzers of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. As we have seen, it was give and take from early on. And it would be Romitstrov and his staff that would get to witness this titanic clash of armor. A clash that would take place within roughly 3 square miles, with the Pasel River to the north and the railway embankment at Belenichino to the south that went into Prokhorovka. Yet despite his front row seat, despite his plans and preparations, once the opposing tanks met, the battle became an uncontrollable melee, which would hurt the Germans more than the Russians. As the Tigers lost their advantage being this close to the enemy, the first charge of the Soviet tanks got through the German screen in some areas. Explosions followed, flame bursts cut through the swirling dust, the results being turrets, separated from their holes, went into the air, as did men. As the opposing tanks did their dance of death, though not that elegantly, the wheat fields and orchards were crushed beneath their treads. The same could be said of the bodies that had been thrown from shattered tanks. As the two tank forces all around were so mixed, the artillery from each side held back. The same went for the opposing air forces, who settled for going after each other. Just north of the Pasel River, the Soviet right, the German left, the tanks here clashed as well. But here infantry units also clashed. The 31st Tank and 33rd Rifle Corps took on the panzers and men of the Totenkopf Division. And though it was the normal give and take of any battle, as all the Germans here were wearing the death heads insignia of the SS, they were killed as soon as they were captured. No prisoners, no dealing with German wounded. To the German right, the Das Reich, which had 10 Tiger tanks, was engaged by the 2nd Guards Tank Corps, or rather on the Das Reich's right flank, which was supposed to be protected by Army Detachment Kiev, yet it was still some 12 miles distant. The gamble of sending almost half of his last reserves south by Romitstrov was paying off. Going back to the center of the Soviet attack, the 18th and 29th Tank Corps, the equivalent of 4 German divisions, was closely engaged with the Liebstandarte, which had about 77 panzers. And besides the number advantage, the Soviet tanks, trucks, and overall equipment was fresh compared to the battle-worn German equipment. As one of the German tank men wrote later, "We had been warned to expect resistance from fixed anti-tank guns and some tanks in static positions. Also the possibility of a few independent brigades of the slower KV type. In fact, we found ourselves taking on a seemingly inexhaustible mass of enemy armor. Never have I received such an overwhelming impression of Russian strength and numbers as on that day. The clouds of dust made it difficult to get help from the Luftwaffe, and soon many of the T-34s had broken past our screen and were streaming like rats all over the battlefield. Thus was the German center pierced and the German right equally pressed. One Das Reich officer, named Kruger, had an enemy bullet set off an incendiary grenade that was on his person, and knowing what was coming, Kruger took off his pants and underwear, fighting on naked from the waist down. In other words, the Das Reich was taking the fight to the enemy as best they could. And yet, just after noon, the Soviet right began to crumble. Again, the Totenkopf had the most panzers, about 122, and the Russian weak spot seemed to be between the 5th Guards and the 5th Guards tank armies. The 5th Guards themselves had no tanks and clearly not enough artillery for what was coming at them, so it was showing signs of collapse, specifically the 18th Tank Corps between the two 5th Armies. If the Soviet right flank fell, soon panzers would reach Prokhorovka, but worse still, they would be able to get in behind the Soviet forces that were attacking the German center. As Romitstrov had gambled before and won, he gambled again, this time taking the last of his reserve force, the 10th Guards Mechanized and 24th Guards Tank Brigades, and sent them to this troubled spot. They either popped up the right flank, or this was the beginning of the end. The 24th Guards Tank Brigade, led by Colonel Karpov, was sent to help the failing 18th Tank Corps and the 5th Guards Army. Meanwhile, Colonel Mikhailov's 10th Guards Mechanized Brigade dashed to the far Russian right flank. It took a while, but the panzers eventually quit trying to come around the Soviet line and instead pulled themselves in to deal with the increased pressure of this new Soviet force in their area. Another turning of the tide moment came against the Tigers. The newly supported 18th Tank Corps went back into the fighting, and one Captain Shrimpkin, following Romitrov's orders, dashed in close to Michael Wittmann's platoon of 3 Tigers. Going up and down the gentle slopes here, every time the approaching Soviet tanks were within view, the Tigers opened up, taking out enemy tanks each time. But the rest kept coming. Again, per Romitrov, Captain Shrimpkin and another 14 tanks knew they had to get within 800 meters of the Tigers to have any chance of penetrating the Tigers' front armor. With Shrimpkin in the lead, his T-34 closed in on the Tigers. As one of them turned, Shrimpkin opened fire, putting a shell into its side, disabling it. But then that Tiger turned its gun Shrimpkin's way and fired twice at him, scoring a hit each time. The Soviet tank soon caught fire, and Shrimpkin, now injured, was pulled out by his crewmen. They hid as best they could, but soon the Tiger tank crew spotted them and started closing in, wanting revenge. Seeing this, the men that saved Shrimpkin climbed back into their T-34 and charged right at the Tiger. The Tiger, commanded by SS Staff Sergeant Loesch, turned and charged at the oncoming T-34. Suddenly, Loesch's Tiger stopped and fired, a tried and true tactic. But the 88mm round hit the side of the T-34 and ricocheted away. But as the Soviet tank was still charging, the driver decided to use his 30-ton T-34 as a weapon, ramming the Tiger. Both tanks caught fire, but Loesch jumped out before the Soviet tank's ammunition exploded, destroying both tanks. The Soviet driver did not escape in time. It was then that the gap between the 3 SS divisions hurt the German attack. Or rather, there were forces in between the Liebstandarte and the Totenkopf to their left, but it wasn't a strong one. So when, around 6 p.m., the 181st and 170th Tank Brigades charged at this very spot, the Liebstandarte was forced back, lest they be bypassed and attacked from behind. This intensity was matched by the Soviet anti-tank gun crews. As one German soldier put it, salvo after salvo of Stalin's organs rained down upon our positions, with artillery and mortar shells in between. T-34 after T-34 rolled over the hill. 3, 5, 10. But what was the use of counting? And it was an artillery attack like this that allowed some Soviet tanks to approach the Liebstandarte's command post. It had to use its anti-tank guns to destroy the enemy right at its doorstep. Then a hard rain came, reducing visibility. By 9 p.m., both sides were exhausted, and so started falling back to defensive positions. Their guns fell silent. Romitrov told the tanks to refuel where they were and to hold their positions. The men were fed, the damaged tanks were towed away, with all hoping that they could re-enter the fighting that was sure to come on the morrow. Meanwhile, SS Corps Commander Hauser had all damaged vehicles destroyed. These explosions were heard throughout the night, but no one got too excited. They were just too tired. And while this was going on, the Soviet engineers, as they had since the opening of Operation Citadel, moved up and buried mines in the expected paths of the enemy panzers. And just before his 2 hours of sleep, Romitrov assumed The Germans would come hard tomorrow with a tank charge. They had to do something to retake the initiative, or things would only get worse for them. Few things in life are as dangerous as a desperate man. Like most senior officers of the German army, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was excited by the coming citadel. Finally, a chance to set things right in the east. Rommel's diary entries for the first 9 days of July were full of hope, but with the next entry, the tone was the exact opposite. He wrote, "War conference with the Fuhrer. The British and Americans have invaded Sicily with paratroops and landing craft." Indeed, in fact, what was landed by the Western Allies were 8 divisions, 3 more than were used at Normandy in 44, and of course far greater than the number of defenders on the island. By July 12th, the Western Allies had put ashore some 160,000 men and 600 tanks. Besides the overwhelming numbers, this largest amphibious landing of the war so far caught Berlin completely off guard, as did Operation Kutuzov, also launched on July 12, 1943. The attacking forces of Romitrov were not simply trying to save Prokhorovka, they were trying to surround and destroy the head of the southern pincer of Citadel. Meanwhile, the northern half of Operation Kutuzov's goal was to cut off Model's 9th Army from retreating. General Mikhail Kutuzov saved Russia from Napoleon years ago. Now his namesake would save Mother Russia again, this time from Germany. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So, as we can see, things are not going well for the Germans. Yes, there's Soviet numbers, but there's also Soviet tenacity. And Romitrov was right. You can make all the plans you want, but once contact with the enemy is made, it kind of goes all out the window, and then it's up to individual personalities, their temperament, the training, the quality of their machines, that kind of stuff. But again, numbers help. I'm not going to lie. So anyways, I'd like to say welcome aboard to my latest member, Brian Volan from Maumee, Ohio. Brian, I'm sure I butchered that, so I apologize. But anyways, thank you very much. I don't have any donations from last time, but I do have a gentleman who bought a Churchill mug. Thank you very much. Brett Van de Linder from Wheat Ridge, Colorado. So thank you very much, Brett. It's appreciated. I think I'm going to have to order some more. Anyway, so again, if you did not know or if you forgot, I do have Churchill coffee mugs. You can see the information on the website. Anyway, so we're getting close to wrapping this up, and then we'll show the effects. We're gonna, after we do this battle, I think probably one more episode, then we have to kind of finish off the general operation of what's going on up north. And I don't want to go into Europe too much because then we have to back up and have the Americans and others land in North Africa. So we're almost there, and then we'll switch gears. So this is basically how the battle in the East is unfolding. Not going well for the Germans, but again, if you can't knock them out in the first round and you don't have a backup plan, you get what you get. Take care, everyone.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Incoming transmission. Hello, and welcome to History Dispatches.
We are the father-son duo bringing you the weird, the wild, the wacky, and the craziest tales from across time.
From the Ice Bowl
to the Great Heathen Army.
And the head of Oliver Cromwell.
The same head they kept on a pike for 3 years?
Yep, all here on History Dispatches.
New episodes every weekday.
Find out more at historydispatches.com or wherever you get your podcast app.